Kia ora koutou. Welcome to today's online Zooey for everybody who is interested in museum funding post-COVID. This is a relatively informal event today. We had originally planned this when the Ministry for Culture and Heritage would be ready to talk about their various funds. And after the opening of the Museum Hardship Fund. However, because of the timing of the consultation for the other funds, they are not available for this particular Zooey. So I'm going to try and represent what is happening so far and invite just a general discussion from among the people. We've got 22 participants today, so we should be able to allow for people to have a bit of a chat about their situation and about what is on the horizon for them and how these funds might help. So what I'll do first is just a little quick rattle through what's on the table and what I know about it so far, and then we'll open it up for a discussion. I'm going to share my screen so that you can see the slides that I've made just as very brief summaries. So as I hope you're all aware, there we go, hopefully you'll be able to see that now. As I hope everyone's aware, there are a whole lot of funds are being made available to help us in these weird and crazy times we find ourselves in. Particularly the Ministry for Culture and Heritage, Mana Tū Taonga, has opened up engagement on the 3 new funds that they are working on at the moment: the Cultural Sector Capability Fund, Creative Arts Recovery and Employment Fund, and Cultural Sector Innovation Fund. And I'll get into those in a little bit more detail shortly. But I just want to note that they're not the only funds available to our sector. There's quite a lot of other money floating around out there, some of which is relatively easily accessible and some of which is not. I can congratulate some of the museums who are joining us here today for being successful in receiving money through the tourism funding, which got 400 million for tourism recovery, and I know that some were successful in achieving some funding through the STAP, the Strategic Tourism Assets Protection Program. There are also some who've received some funding through their councils, which is really cool. Other councils are, on the other hand, making their institutions cut their budgets, so making it worse. And what we've found through our discussions with our members around the country, is that the situations are incredibly variable. Some institutions are feeling okay, others are feeling really under pressure, and others are just still feeling incredibly uncertain. Maybe okay for now, but not quite sure what's going to happen, particularly when the new financial year kicks in July 2021. So I hope that, as is appropriate, everybody's aware of some of those different funding options which are out there. Some of them are open now, like the Museum Hardship Fund. And if you are interested in that fund, then do please contact National Services Te Paerangi. You must talk with one of the museum or iwi development officers about that before applying for it. It is only $2 million over 2 years, so that's not a huge amount for our sector. When we consider that there's somewhere between $350 and $500 million of direct operating expenditure that goes out of our museums and galleries into the economy every year, $2 million is really just a drop in the bucket. And when we know that some people have already had their budgets cut by 10 or 20%, then an awful lot more than that has already been lost to our sector. We have had the benefit of some of the wage subsidies. Museums Aotearoa was able to access that in the first round, which was really helpful. But we're just really getting to grips with what might happen in the coming months particularly if we continue to operate under the kind of restrictions we're operating under now. One of the things I've been involved in over the last 2 years, which has been very helpful at this time, is being part of the Tourism Industry Aotearoa Board and being party to the discussions around tourism and what people think might happen in future. And it's looking a lot less hopeful than it was even 2 months ago. The feeling is that we're unlikely to get any significant international tourist money coming into the country for probably another year at least. So on the one hand, that's income that we're not getting. On the other hand, New Zealanders who would normally be travelling overseas are hopefully spending some of that disposable income here in our own country. And that is an area where at least some of that revenue from retail and admission charges and special experiences may be able to come back into our sector. So as I hope you all know, the Ministry for Culture and Heritage has now opened these 3 new funds. And yesterday, today and Monday, they've got 9 focus group sessions, 3 for each fund. So that's about 60 people in the focus groups for each of those funds, with a bit of double up, because I'm doing focus groups for all 3, which is a lot of time and a lot of interesting kōrero with people from right across the arts, culture and heritage sector. There are people there from music, literature, performing arts, computer gaming, all sorts of different aspects of the museum, of the arts, culture and heritage landscape, and the word ecosystem has been used quite a lot. And I'm just going to go through them kind of briefly in the order in which they are applicable. So the first one is and I've got them in the wrong order. Have I done that right? This one, the Cultural Sector Capability Fund. So that's to protect capability in the short term. It is also the smallest of these funds. It is $20 million over 2 years, of which $8 million has already been distributed, $2 million each through existing agencies, Creative New Zealand, New Zealand On Air, the Film Commission and New Zealand Music Commission. So that means there's $12 million of contestable funding. And I hope that, and I was going to put it in the chat, but I can't actually immediately find it, but I will put it, it is on our website, the link on the Ministry for Culture and Heritage website, which has the background material to all this, which only came out on Wednesday, and I'm still digesting it, and I expect a lot of other people are too. And just to note that feedback is required on this by the 22nd of September. So anything that you think of after this session, do fire through to me or put in as your direct feedback via the Ministry for Culture and Heritage website. And we will be reminding everybody of that through our emails. So the Cultural Sector Capability Fund is a relatively short-term fund, not a huge amount of money. The aim for it is to build and enhance skills and knowledge of the people who work in cultural organisations and businesses, provide access to external advice or services to build businesses or technical capability, provide access to tools and resources that enable business activity. So that means that you can use it to hire people, train people, hire consultants, potentially purchase software or other kinds of tools and resources that might be able to help you to maintain and increase capability. The proposed scale of this fund, as it is currently, is up to $100,000 for a proposal that will benefit a single organisation or business, and up to $750,000 for proposals that benefit multiple organisations or businesses. They do say that priority will be given to proposals that benefit multiple cultural sector organisations or businesses. So they're really trying to encourage collaboration. They're trying to encourage the building of partnerships, whether those are regional or cross-sector or within a broader sector nationally. I think there's some interesting opportunities in this fund for members of Museums Aotearoa and the museum and gallery sector generally to think about ways that we could access this fund for our collective good. One of the things which I'm really interested in, for instance, is in that building skills and knowledge. For instance, mentoring and assisting people to maintain and share and upskill in their career and their professional capacity. But I'm certainly interested in what other people think about that. Now, just before we open it up for discussion, I'm going to quickly go through the other funds so that we know what it is we're talking about as we go through. The next one, in terms of its timescale, is the CARE Fund, Creative Arts Recovery and Employment Fund. So this one is particularly focused on making sure that there are people maintaining their engagement in employment and training across the arts, culture and heritage landscape. So it will create employment and training opportunities, ensure vital skills, talent and creative infrastructure is not lost, and maintain and expand public access to creative and cultural experiences. Now, I haven't done a focus group on this one yet. I'm not sure if anybody in this call has. So I don't have any more real insight than what's been put on the table so far. However, I have had some discussions with the Ministry for Culture and Heritage around one of the proposals in particular, which is funding for touring exhibitions. And this is something that we identified when we developed a position paper for the incoming government in early 2018 as an area that would really help our sector to have some sort of contestable touring exhibitions fund to encourage broader access to our collections and our knowledge and through exhibitions. They've also got 3 other core streams, one on wellbeing outcomes. Again, I'm not too sure what that one might look at. They're talking about public health interventions, but also broadening access to creative and cultural experiences in schools and supporting vulnerable groups. They're talking about new public art. So that is something where our institutions could be working with local artists, for instance, and giving them an opportunity to be employed and to have make some new output, focusing on projects over $200,000. And then there's building skills for the future. And I think that's another area which our sector might be able to get involved with, particularly in encouraging perhaps more diversity in our workforce and encouraging people who perhaps aren't coming through the university education stream to get involved in employment in our sector. And the last one, and the one which is supposed to have the biggest legacy, is the Innovation Fund. And this one appears to me to be, at this stage at least, the most amorphous. Its scope is to support cultural sector projects that enable content to be consumed in new ways and or by new audiences. And in the group that I was in talking about this one yesterday, there was a lot of debate about how this is not just digital. Innovation has often been primarily associated with technology. And I think the intention that this is not. So if it's not just technology, what is it? What else could it be? And they say that the fund will be structured to allow for small, medium and large application thresholds with different expectations for each. As I say, this one is to me the least clear at this point. So we're talking about these 3 different funds. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to open it up for anybody who would like to have a question or perhaps offer some suggestions or some insight into perhaps anything that comes to mind from those 3 funds first up, and then we might delve into what the perceived needs are for your institutions. So who would like to kick us off? Just unmute yourself and dive in, please. Can't see anybody putting their hand up or unmuting themselves.
Hi.
So perhaps we'll start with an easier question. Would anybody like to share with us perhaps what you are feeling is the biggest impact, particularly financially, and how you think you might, how you think some assistance might be able to help with that? I'm going to just pick someone. Lucinda, you and I have talked about this a little bit in the Directors of Smaller Museums.
We have indeed.
What do you think about how the impact is really, how the impact of COVID is really affecting your museum and your staff and your volunteers, and where you think some financial support might be able to be directed?
Oh, there's quite a lot of need.
Muted. No, you're not.
Am I? Can you hear me?
No, we can't hear. Oh, sorry. It's me. Go.
Okay. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm from Nelson Provincial Museum. I guess our situation is that we have lost around 15% of our expected income this year. During lockdown, we had a really good conversation with our board chair and the 2 mayors of the councils that fund us around their expectations, and they gave us pretty clear message to make ends meet, that there's no additional sort of funds coming from councils because they're simply not in a position to be able to do that, because, you know, obviously everybody's been hit. So we've had to cut that money really from our operations. I guess the biggest impact for us has been holding staff positions open, that we had some staff vacancies, and we've been carrying those, and that's, I guess, had a real impact in terms of on the team, in terms of the load that they're carrying, and the not being able to meet the you know, the expectations of public, and that I think the impact on the staff has been significant. And collections leader Shay is here today as well. She might want to add some things about that. It's been a major impact on our volunteers too, because we've lost the people who are actually supervising those roles, so that their work's been compromised. So how funding can help us? Being able to bring in funds for staff, I guess, to be able to get those positions back again, to be able to rebuild our capacity to what we were, I suppose, is going to be major. Funding for, we're an organisation that has some ageing infrastructure to deal with, so we need servers go, you know, on its last legs. We've got aircon issues. We need a new collection store, which we're fundraising for. So funding for any of those sort of infrastructure projects would also be incredibly helpful, because we're also really conscious that the sponsorship arena is sort of dried up for us as well. So I guess that's a quick snapshot of where we are.
Yeah, that's interesting, because that's something which came across in our most recent survey, is that people are finding that their capital projects are either completely stopped or significantly slowed down, even though there have been a few notable wins with the Provincial Growth Fund or Shovel Ready Projects funding. So that is going to potentially be quite a handbrake for some organisations.
And we're in a situation where we have to get out of the building that we are currently in, and it's been worked on for a long time, and we are going to need to get funding support, I suppose, from central government to support the funding that we have.
Whoops, we've just lost you. You just muted again.
Sorry. So I'm really hoping, because we're in a desperate situation with our collection store, I'm really hoping that there is going to be an opportunity in one of these new MCH funds for those bigger projects, so that we can continue to care for our collection.
Yeah, certainly from what I understand, these particular funds that they've announced at this point are not capital funds. They're project funds, but not capital funds. And there hasn't been an announcement yet, to my knowledge, of the Regional Cultural Heritage Fund, which is a capital fund, the old museum, what was it? The Museum Capital Fund that Helen Clark started. Now that one is, I understand, continuing, but there hasn't been an announcement on it yet. There was a round earlier this year. What I'm quite interested in, you mentioned, Lucinda, just to follow up on that, you mentioned you wanted, you would appreciate funding just to pay your staff, to retain your staff. Do you think that sort of thing can be framed as a project under one of these kinds of funds, or is that not really possible?
I am not sure, and it's not so much, probably we're lucky in a situation that it's not so much that we can keep paying people, because we can, but it's the positions that we lost through people leaving before the lockdown that we just haven't been able to fill. So those are the ones, and we are hopeful that the hardship grant will help us towards that, and we've had some conversations with our NSTP rep who thinks that might be helpful, but obviously that's not a huge amount of money in that fund.
Right.
And it haven't really, not really sure of the potential in the other ones for those roles.
Interesting. Okay. Kahutoi, did you have something you wanted to say earlier? I think I missed you with your hand up.
That's okay. I was just sort of looking at, in terms of training and maybe internships. I'm just new Associate Curator Māori at the Auckland Museum, and I'm finding myself sort of, oh well, you know, it's early days started, but it's really mind-boggling the amount of work. And I thought, you know, when I saw the training part, it was really good to mentor, you know, even students coming through. We are talking about future, whether that could be a possibility or not. The other thing was, would you be able to share with the PowerPoint that you put up? Sorry, I came in a little bit late. I was on another call. If that information can be emailed.
Yes, certainly. And yeah, the information is all on the MCH website. And in fact, I can show you that. It looks like this. And I can put that link into the chat for you. And
thanks. Great. Oh, cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That's quite all right. So it's all there, but it's quite dense. Not bad necessarily to make sense of straight away.
Thank you.
So that's that one. Hopefully that has got, oops, not sure if that's got there. There we go, I've just popped that one into the chat. But I certainly take your point about training and internships and mentoring. That's something which I've had quite a lot of discussion with the Ministry for Culture and Heritage policy people about, because even before COVID, it was a very topical discussion, how we get a more diverse workforce, how we encourage people to come into our sector who aren't necessarily coming through the more traditional educational routes, and people that we have lots of people within the sector who could mentor and assist people coming in.
I think it's about good use of time and you know, capitalizing on that, so that when they in turn come up, they have a fairly good idea of what they're doing. It must work. So to me, it's a win-win situation, because I actually come from an education background anyway. So thank you for that. Yeah.
Kia ora.
Kia ora.
Victoria, did you have something you want to say? And actually, I should have suggested that you just introduce yourselves very briefly when you're when you've got something to say as well, just because some of us know each other reasonably well and perhaps others don't.
Kia ora koutou, I'm Victoria from Auckland Museum. I look after online cenotaph. I was just sort of interested in the parts where they're wanting to invest in Pacific and Māori staff, but the time frame seems to be quite limited, so we continue to part-time employ people part-time, and then we don't have an ongoing investment in our staff. And so I sort of feel like, are these any of these projects, do you feel like there's any interest in whether these projects, if they are established, whether there'll be ongoing funding from that other slush fund? Because I do have to sort of express, and I'm sure you know, the feeling is I'm quite frustrated with MCH because I've seen that there's been people being able to turn around packages and talk about giving up money, and they've been able to achieve that within 6 weeks, 2 months. And I don't understand what the limit with MCH is, because we're raring to go. We've got ideas, but it seems like there's a roadblock. So it would be quite interesting to see whether they've sort of expressed why they are so reticent to start having discussions. And also just knowing what the time frame is. Are they expecting us, us to wait X amount of months, and then we get 2 weeks to put something through?
Probably. It does seem to me that a lot of the way they operate is to suit their own needs, and this is completely off the record. Government agencies have a whole lot of processes that they have to work within, of course, including getting material for approval up to ministers and then back again, and all those sorts of things. I know that there has been a lot of frustration around the timing of this process, that there's money that was allocated 3 months ago or announced 3 months ago, and it's taken this long to actually get any idea of what it is that's being thought about. So yeah, there is some frustration, and from where I sit, we have to express that frustration, but also work with their timeframes as required. What I understand happens now is that this feedback on these particular funds goes through on the 22nd of September. They are going to have, as well as these 3 days of focus groups, they're also going to have some more focus groups on the 21st and 22nd of September, depending on what comes out of this immediate piece of work. Then they're going to have to process all the feedback that they're getting from right across arts, culture and heritage sector, and frame that into some funding programs. And you'll probably be aware that MCH has not over the last umpteen years had any significant expertise and staff resource in funding programs. They've had a few very focused funding programs, so they've had to step up their capacity. So they've got a lot of new staff as well, which doesn't really bode well for how this is going in terms of timing. So in some ways it's probably better if we allow them a little bit more time to get it right than to rush in when not well enough prepared to really put these funds out there in a constructive way. But it is important that we have our say, and it's important that everybody has their say. As I said, Museums Aotearoa will certainly be feeding back and is continuing to do so on a less formal basis. But I do encourage everyone who is out there and is interested to provide feedback through the mechanisms that they've put in place. Would anybody else like to share some of your thoughts on how some funding from government might be able to help your particular situations? Julie from the Suter.
Kia ora. I actually wanted to ask a question a bit backwards. And I'm going to be participating in one of these focus groups on Tuesday for the Care Fund. And one question was, had anyone been in a focus group yet, and what was it like? And then if there was anything that people wanted to feed in that I could be feeding in. I mean listening here and writing down notes, but I kind of like to know what to expect, and if there's other ideas out there that because I've got that opportunity to be able to put them forward.
Yes, is there anyone else who's been in one of these focus groups so far? Just unmute yourself and say. No, I think Liz Cotton's going to be in one later today. I was in 2 yesterday. They're 2 hours long. The first about half an hour is kind of background and figuring out who everyone is and what the background to the funds is. Then they split up into quite small groups of 3 or 4 or 5 people and have a focused discussion on aspects of the fund as presented so far on those A3 pages which are on the website through that link that I shared. Then those have come back together, and they've been using an online tool, a kind of an online whiteboard tool, and you can put up post-it notes, etc. It's a not unpleasant and kind of experience from my perspective. And one of the interesting aspects was actually talking with the other people in the small group breakout rooms who might come from, screen production or orchestra or theatre or video games or wherever. And so it's interesting to see where our sector might sit in relation to some of those other perspectives. Who else can I shoulder tap to? Perhaps,
I think David Reeves was going to.
I was just going to say, is he still there? There he is. David, you had something to say.
I just need to hang on 5 minutes to get into a less noisy place, so I'll come back to you.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you, David. I wonder, Andrea at Shantytown, you're in perhaps a more challenging situation in some ways, being in an organisation which really is so dependent on visitors. Do you have some thoughts that you could share on the effects on you and what might help you through this time?
Sure. Talk about being put on the spot. Yeah, look, Shantytown is 100% dependent on the visitor coming in, and we've lost around 50% of our visitation. So we've got whatever's left in terms of the New Zealand visitor who has the appetite to travel now and keep on travelling until the international borders open. We've also been privileged to receive some funding under the STAP fund, which is really awesome, but that side of it is purely for the tourism aspect of Shantytown. What would be helpful from this is when funding's available from a capital perspective, because that is, we're at a point we can't do anything in that regard, but also funding for staffing. And look, you know, we've probably been like, if not everybody, most of the museums, and have grabbed the wage subsidies as we've qualified for them, and it's been amazing and really, really gratefully received. But of course that's now reaching the end of its journey. But it's about retention of the staff. If they're good people and you want to hold on to them, it's just when your turnover has decreased substantially, that's really what we want to hold on to. So whilst these funds are good, and we'll obviously absorb as much as we can about what we perhaps could apply for, yeah, wages, I think.
Can I ask, if your visitation is down and you want to retain your staff and you can't find, you don't have that kind of tourism driver for keeping them, would the kind of project that might come through, say, an innovation fund, potentially be a way of retaining staff with a slightly different job description?
Yes, because it just allows us, if I want to use the new term, pivoting those staff into something new, something different and something innovative. And that's probably also important for Shantytown as an organisation, tourism or otherwise, is to look at different ways of doing things, but also new things that we need to bring in, so that the New Zealand visitor today, who may not come back for another 30 years when they bring their own children or grandchildren in, will come a lot more frequently. So at the moment, our view is completely disregarding any international visitation whatsoever, and just solely concentrating on our domestic base. But definitely looking at new things and brand new things, and you know, the staff would be up for it. They're all passionate about what they do, so yeah, without a doubt. Yeah.
And how long would it take you to actually figure out what those new things might be? I mean, that's one of the tricky parts, isn't it?
Yeah, well, we're not sure we're ready for that right now. So that's, look, the sooner the guidelines around these funds, clear guidelines, become available to us, it's how quickly we can turn our mind to what is important for us and also what's beneficial for the community that we're in. Not sure. Hopefully there's a reasonably long lead-in time, or at least several bites of the pie, so not all of the money is available right now, that probably over the next 6, 12, 18 months, there's some aspects of the funds that become available, because not everybody will be ready to go now.
So there's a bit of chicken and egg there, isn't there?
There is a little bit, yeah. So that's a challenge.
We want the funds to be available. We don't want MCH to drag the chain.
No.
But on the other hand, we don't quite know what our needs are going to be in another 12 months to 24 months as yet.
Yes.
I'm happy to jump in now with the thoughts I had. It's David Reeves. I'm the Director of Collections and Research at Auckland Museum. My reading of a lot of the funds criteria, as far as we've got them so far, is that there's a very high degree of interest in collaboration. And so the question I think that would be helpful for us to ask is not how these funds will assist our institutions, but how these funds will assist us as a sector, because it seems that they're very keen to fund things which are system-wide or parts of our subsector, rather than funding individual projects or individual organisations. The Capability Fund is a little bit different, but I think the two bigger funds, they're definitely looking at sort of sector-wide benefit, which might have a bit more of a legacy beyond the 3 years. So if we use the money to sort of establish a program or a upskill or new development of practice that then can be implemented going on. The other point that in the few conversations I've had with the officials from MCH is that they are cautious about not wanting this funding to replace funding which was previously local government funding in particular. So they're definitely wanting to see this as funding new things or new ways of doing old things. And so really I think we need to, and perhaps it's for another day, but a group like this could do some brainstorming around what are some sector-wide things that we could usefully employ some people to do, to develop for us. Is it a range of touring exhibitions perhaps? I don't know, that's not a particularly innovative or new idea, but maybe there's some market research that we could share. Is there some shared training that we could propose? Is there a shared sort of digitisation approach? So not individual projects necessarily, but more shared. So I think that's my reading of it, and we've got to be careful that we're not only thinking about our own situations, which understandably is where all of us start, because that's what's right in front of us.
Thank you, David. Yes, I absolutely agree, and I think that was one of the reasons why the policy was latched onto the idea of a fund for touring exhibitions, for instance, because it would encourage collaborative projects which would share expertise as well as increasing access to our collections around the country.
I just wanted to pick up something on what David was saying. I'm really supportive of that approach, and I think there'd be some real benefit. And I think doing one project I'd like to advocate for that you mentioned is around research work on our audiences in terms of the post-COVID environment, audience segmentation, how that has all changed. That would be incredibly valuable for our sector. So I think that would be something that we should really look at doing, and that's going to be valuable for everybody, all of our museums.
Okay, thank you. That's good to hear, because it's something where we've got a bit of a visitor market research in the audiences we are already getting, and we had a fair degree of success with sort of flipping to delivering some things online, but we really don't know much about that online audience, or indeed about the audience that is not using our services. And I think that's a common thing across all institutions. It's much harder and much more expensive to do research into people that you don't have an engagement or a relationship with, and that might be something that we can share.
Definitely, and in terms of those national audiences, I think as well that would be really useful, because in the smaller places we don't have that money to do that research, so it would be, I think, really helpful.
That's interesting, because prior to all of this, Museums Aotearoa was already committed to reviewing the National Visitor Survey, for instance. And we currently have a museum studies students doing a very small piece of scoping work on that, and some of you will be contacted by her over the next few weeks just to get some feedback on your previous experiences of the visitor survey and where you think it might go in future. So that's just a very small step along the way. David also mentioned that staff capacity work as well, which I'm very interested in. I wonder if there is any other people who have some thoughts on how can we use this as an opportunity to really collaboratively, sector-wide, increase our staff capacity and our staff capability. Was that Elaine putting your hand up, or you just, oh. No, nobody else wants to talk about that.
I was just thinking in terms of a tripartite of ministries: Ministry of Culture and Heritage, Ministry of Education, and possibly the Department of Internal Affairs, working together for all the resources that we have together, and bringing up the younger minds to inherit and invest in their knowledge through our taonga, through our archives. And I think relationships is really, really important, and it kind of fits in what David was talking about, you know, looking at the cross sector, not just within Ministry of Cultural and Heritage, but the other ministries, because we don't know the impact of COVID. You know, if we're totally reliant on international clientele, when it comes to situations like that, we have to turn to each other. And so I'm just maybe kind of suggesting that we need to look at each other and formulate those relationships to be able to build on things such as the research, things such as what can pull our people, or our, you know, the education sector in, rather than just being in our little silos. Just a suggestion anyway.
Yeah, thank you, Kahu. You've reminded me of something that I was going to add, which is that we're all aware that the New Zealand curriculum is going to include New Zealand histories from the beginning of 2022. And this seems that it might be an ideal opportunity for the GLAM sector to get a coordinated approach to how we're going to prepare the resources to support that. And obviously the Ministry of Education would be a key partner in that, in terms of helping formulate what they anticipate being taught, and then so that we can, all our organisations can prepare the materials for the students and teachers so that it's ready in time. And it seems crazy that every single separate school or every single separate gallery, museum, library, archive will be scurrying around trying to anticipate that need, when we've got the opportunity to perhaps have a project team nationally and use some of this money to coordinate. And so you can divvy up the work in that way and find who's got strengths in particular areas and develop resources around particular teaching modules, if that's how they're structuring it. But we are not getting a whole heap of information out of the Ministry of Education about how they're structuring it yet. So that might be something to give a little prod to as well.
Yes, thank you for that, David. There's an interagency group, and I've been to one meeting back in February, and there was another one which was cancelled or postponed in August. And I know that the work on developing the curriculum material on NZ histories has been going on despite COVID. So there is certainly an opportunity there, and it's really good to highlight it in this context. Thank you.
Philippa, can I just jump in here? Sorry. I had a conversation with the principal yesterday here in Mercury Bay, and they've actually been asked to become one of the trial schools.
Oh,
so
okay.
That's obviously already out there, which I'm going to pass on to our museum educators team as well, because we don't know anything about that, and we should really be linked into that somehow, because we need to work with our local schools, or just to know kind of where that curriculum is going and what their needs are as well. But it sounds like they're all kind of individually working on, like David just said, they're all individually working on their curriculum, but are becoming trial schools within that. So how is that going to link into everybody else?
Yeah, that's really, really interesting. I'm not up to speed with where it's up to, because the last update was cancelled. So that's really interesting that there is some work going on the ground already. and it's a really important area. I remember David Fleming from Museums Liverpool, who was in New Zealand over a decade ago now to give a conference paper, and he was firmly of the opinion that museums and galleries are educational institutions, and we should be more closely aligned with formal education as well as informal education. We've got 6 minutes left. Shay, you were going to contribute something.
Yeah, just a discussion that we've had internally is also the issue of repeat visitation. So I guess it's sort of this interacts with what we've said earlier about knowing our audience. So that's one challenge for us is how we get the repeat visitors back. And I echo the issue with education and working with teachers and even upskilling teachers to take a material cultural approach or a museum approach. And that may also assist with getting our students back into the museum on a weekend or something like that. So that's one thing that I think as a sector we could potentially work on with the audience engagement, is that repeat visitation, because at the moment with no international visitors, that's a huge thing.
That's a really good point. Unfortunately, I can't see everyone at once, but do just, yes, Julie.
There's sort of a more random thoughts too, but one of the things that's impacted on our income is no use of our theatre, or little use, because performing arts, film, lectures has been severely impacted by COVID. And I mean, if we think we're in pain in our sector, the performing arts, theatre, music and so on is just desperate. And we've just, for instance, in Nelson, the Arts Festival is supposed to be in October, and now most of that's cancelled. And so, I mean, this is just a random thought, but maybe also if we're thinking about collaborations, and maybe we might have success when we're looking at these funds, at thinking about new ways of working with performing arts, so that, you know, that can keep existing, because they're really having to think up new ways to deliver to audiences. Yeah, to survive and keep going, but maybe we can somehow incorporate that into our practice. I mean, I haven't got any bright ideas at the moment, but
that was a topic in one of my breakout groups yesterday. Was the challenge for performing arts when you don't have an audience, and I know that some art forms can present their work virtually more easily than others. So that's an interesting aspect, is how perhaps museums and galleries can work with performing arts and other kinds of cross-sector initiatives as well.
It's also the cost of delivery too. So we've thought up ways that we can use our theatre and have safe social distancing and so on, but it comes down to audience size and the cost of putting on productions and actually just turning on the lights in a theatre and running it and kind of dealing with those, to make things even viable to put on.
Yeah, I don't know how the New Zealand Symphony Orchestra are doing it. They've been performing to an empty Michael Fowler Centre and live streaming it free.
Oh, just one sort of last thought I just want to pop out there. And this is a bit of a reflection on the funds, and we have had the message that the Hardship Fund is for the small museums and the little ones small, and then the other funds are for the larger museums. I just want to put our hand up, and I know that there's no one here from MCH who has control over this, but to I guess and for those of you who are in those focus groups, to advocate for some of that money coming to the smaller, into the regions as well, because I think there's a risk that the big players may by gravitational pull all that project funding towards them, and I think there's a lot of capability in the smaller places, and I would just advocate for those voices to encourage that spread throughout the country.
Thank you, Lucinda. That's a really important point. The material I've read so far does definitely make it clear that this funding is available to all kinds of organisations, whether they're council funded, government funded, privately funded, or whatever, as long as they can prove that they meet the goals of those funds. So we're running right out of time, but this has been a really useful and interesting discussion for me, and I hope it might help some of you to just think about it a little bit more in terms of your own situation. And please do email me, call Museums Aotearoa with any thoughts that you might want to share for our own thinking. Just looking at my brief notes, I'm really interested in the idea of sector-wide projects. I think the Ministry for Culture and Heritage will also be interested in regional projects that are cross-sector. There's definitely some interest in audiences and research, and some opportunities in education and working with the new curriculum, and a lot of interest in staffing and staff capability and capacity and retention. If I've missed anything, if you have some more suggestions, please do contact me or any of our board members, and I see Liz Cotton somewhere on this call. Hello, Liz. So thank you very much for sharing with us, and do please keep in touch, and I'll hope to see you again soon. Ka kite anō.